Welcome to the Good Reading Magazine podcast. Good Reading is a monthly magazine dedicated to books and reading and aims to help readers discover their next favourite book. You can find out more about the books discussed on today's podcast at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.
Tasma Walton is a proud Bunwurrung woman from the saltwater country of Melbourne and surrounding coastlines. As an award-winning actor, Tasma has recently garnered recognition for her role of Mary Swan in the Mystery Road television and film franchise. Tasma's first novel, Heartless, was nominated for an Australian Book Industry Award. Robbie Arnott is the author of Limberlost, The Rain Heron and Flames. Robbie is a two-time winner of the Age Book of the Year and has also been awarded the Voss Literary Prize. Robbie's been named a Sydney Morning Herald Best Young Novelist and has twice been shortlisted for the Miles Franklin Literary Award and the Dylan Thomas Prize. Today I'm talking to Tasma and Robbie, joint winners of the 2025 ARA Historical Novel Society of Australasia's Prize for Historical Fiction in the Adult category. Tasma for I Am Nannertgarrook and Robbie for Dusk. Tasma and Robbie, congratulations to you both as joint winners of the ARA Historical Novel Prize for 2025.
Thank you so much. It's obviously such a huge honour and such a huge honour to be sharing it with an incredible author like Robbie.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm over the moon and thrilled to be sharing with Tasma, and I can't quite believe it.
The Historical Novel Society Prize recognises this specific genre of fiction. But these two stories take historical fiction into somewhat less familiar territory. Can I say, into the realm of the mythical? Is that a fair observation? And can mythology play a legitimate role within this genre?
In terms of, just for me to understand that idea of mythology, particularly in I Am Nannertgarrook, for me it was, an exploration of women's lore, Lore, which is what I was really interested in bringing into that world so that you understood where our central character comes from. And therefore you can have a greater, empathy with her when that world is completely apocalyptically changed. And in terms of the idea of mythology, I think what I was also interested in exploring was, we get our perspective on that time of our history through colonial journals and diaries, which do their own level of mythologizing about what was happening in reality at the time. And in particular, in this story, we have a very strong worldview from the white men coming into the continent at the time about what the narrative is. And for me, it was very important to show that there is a whole other narrative and worldview that wasn't actually being seen and acknowledged at the time.
I agree with Tasma. And one of the things I love about her novel is the way that mythological elements are treated with such authority and not seen as questions, but seen as truth, and very true to the way people lived. And I think mythology has a lot to say about history, because the idea of mythology and history being separate things is quite recent thinking when it comes to humanity. For much longer periods of history all over the world, mythology and history have been inseparable, and the idea of there being a distinction between the two is a very modern way of thought. So yeah, I think mythology, and I think imaginative thinking and writing in general has a huge role to play in historical fiction.
Neither story seem to be firmly fixed in chronological time. While we are aware of a general period in which these stories unfold, it's existential time rather than chronological time that we seem to be experiencing. Is that something just embodied in the nature of these two stories?
For me, I think yes, because in the story that is told through I Am Nannertgarrook actually spans over several decades. But in reality, what's happening in our central character's world is this sort of repetition that happens in her cycles of time, because she's taken out of the world that she knows, loves and understands, and is thrust into something completely other. And it has a hellish kind of repetitive quality to it. And so I think, yes, once the book sort of comes through in three parts, and once you kind of get into that second and third part, particularly the third part, it's just this eon of time that has this quality that, is repetitive, monotonous, hellish, but she tries to cling to that which she is grounded to in the beginning of the novel to help her survive that period.
For Dusk, I wasn't too interested in naming any specific dates. I'm actually very shocked that my novel was even eligible for this award, to be frank, because what I wanted it to be about and what I wanted the book to say had little to do with the reality of any specific time or place, but more about the feelings of what was happening during the colonial period in somewhere like Tasmania, Lutruwita. So while it's roughly set in the second half of the 19th century in somewhere very much like the Tasmanian highlands, I didn't want to anchor it to any specific date, because when I read historical novels, things like that trip me up. They become stumbling blocks for a reader, because people start going, well, if this is set in 1882, I know exactly what was happening then because I've looked it up. And now I'm thinking about that. And now I've been pulled out of the story. So part of it for me was wanting to write something that felt historical, but wasn't stumbling the reader at any point. It's also why I don't name any specific towns, because then someone goes, well, they rode a horse and it took them 3 days, but really it only would have taken them a day and a half. And now I'm thinking about that. And it sounds kind of grim and practical, but I do think it's quite important because I want the reading experience to feel seamless, like you're falling into a story rather than chipping away at it.
For my story, it was about her worldview, and she doesn't have a colonial perspective on time, basically. So it's not about this date, this year, this place in an English concept. It's for her, time moves in a different way because of her spiritual bedrock and understanding of country.
Robbie, it was really interesting to hear you say you didn't even think this book was going to be eligible for this prize, because a work of historical fiction relies on at least some framework of factual history. But in Dusk, there's something almost supernatural about the story and the setting and the characters and in the narrative. The premise is so bizarre, I'm not sure I could believe it, even if it were true.
That's fascinating to me, Greg, because it makes complete sense to me, only in the sense that I wanted to write about not just the kind of the horrors of the colonial, what should I say? I don't want to say period, because colonialism is ongoing in this country. The essential things that were going on during the invasion and transportation to Lutruwita, Tasmania. So many strange things happened too. We always focus on some of the big name convicts being brought to where I'm from, and the war of attempted extermination of the Indigenous people, all these horrors of that. But there was so much weird stuff happening too. History is always stranger than it is shocking. And part of that was the movement of species across the world, the way that entire feral species were brought to different continents purely on the whim of some duke who wanted to go hunting. And so we have all these feral deer in Tasmania. And it made sense to me that while the deer were coming out of control and devastating what was meant to be pastures for sheep, that they might have tried to control these deer with a pair of pumas who were brought over from South America. Now, I am aware that I'm somewhat odd, and not everybody thinks this way. That the terms of logic of it made perfect sense to me, but because it's so removed from the realities of history, that's kind of why I thought it wouldn't really be up for this gong. But not everyone seems to agree with me, thankfully.
Another one of those follies of colonization, this idea to introduce one species and then introduce another species to control that species. It is bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people thought that I was directly inspired by the myths of big cats in all parts of Australia. I was actually much more inspired by cane toads and transpose that into the Tasmanian highlands. Get some funny looks when I say that, but it's the truth.
Tasma, your story begins in Nerrm, Port Phillip Bay in Victoria, home to the Bunwurrung people. That landscape is beautifully written, lyrical and alive. It's like seeing a country anew, a country as it once was, not as it is. Does this magical place now exist entirely in your imagination?
Oh, that quite hits me in the heart when you say that. What you've just touched on is a really deeply felt thing for, I think, for a lot of First Nations people, is that the country that our old ones walked upon is clearly physically very, very different to what exists today, particularly when you look at a place like Melbourne. And obviously, you don't have to go too far back in the colonial records to see just how much devastation was wrought upon the country in those first few decades and continuing today. of invasion and colonization. However, there are so many places on my country that sing to me, and that I literally, in my mind's eye, see and hear the old ones walking on. And so, yes, while there's concrete and buildings and cars, we have a ceremonial tree, the Naji tree in St Kilda, that is literally 1 metre away from an on-ramp onto the freeway. I still feel, hear, and see my old ones walking there. And it's bittersweet. It's very painful, but it's also very beautiful. What I was trying to capture in the book is, I want people alive today who may or may not know anything about pre-invasion, life on this continent, to become fully immersed in what it was like and to understand how country, as I said before, was the spiritual bedrock, certainly for Bunurong Bunurong people. And if country thrives and looked after you, you were able to have a beautiful life. And it was your custodial duty then to care for country. And it gave every single person in our mob a purpose, and a really deeply respected purpose. So I wanted to open, pull back the curtain a little bit on that world so that people really could feel how incredible it was, how different it is to what we have today, but then also understand what it means when something is completely imposed upon it and that is taken away, so that they might understand how people today feel when you walk on your country and you are struggling to reconcile what it was and what it is today.
You very clearly have a very strong connection to the land, to the country, but you also have a very strong connection to Nannertgarrook, the central character in this book. What is that connection for you?
She's my direct ancestor. She is my 3 times great-grandmother, and it is her story that I explore in the book. And she was with a group of other young women and children, abducted by sealers, taken to the islands off the coast of Tasmania, on-sold to other sealers in a slave market. And then he took her all the way across the southern continent to islands off the coast of Western Australia.
Yeah, I was just thinking when Tasma was speaking then, how in question 7, Richard Flanagan writes about the concept of every when, and a concept that's very familiar to different Indigenous groups all around the world, somewhat simultaneously. And that time is not occurring in the past or in the future, but happening in this kind of whirling maelstrom around us at all the time. And the people who walked the country a very long time ago in many ways are still walking it. It's a kind of strange thing for a contemporary Western mind to wrap its head around, but when you open your thoughts to it, everything seems so much more alive. And particularly for people who identify more as white colonial invaders, however we identify it, it creates a much richer sense of possibility in what Australia was and what Australia could be, in my view.
You go visit a European city, I don't know, I'm talking generally here, but, often people go, I can just feel the history here. I can just, because it is that every when concept. It is around you. There is no difference to our continent, except that it's not that we're seeing buildings from, the French Revolution. We are seeing parts of country that still remains, that's been there for millennia, middens that are thousands and thousands and thousands of years old. And what I would love to see in our country is that we elevate that and respect that and honor that as much as a building or a, statue or whatever.
And the culture you write about in your novel so beautifully outlines this very ancient framework of how to interact with the world in a way that is almost completely lost at the moment. So you'll hear people say, I went on a bushwalk or I went swimming and I felt something so huge within me and I felt so connected to the land and I can't describe it and I can't understand it. I just felt this almost great swelling. And what your novel does so well is kind of illustrate the meaning behind all of that and what that can be and what that can mean to cultures and communities. And I just think it is so profound in showing how much we've lost, but how much we could regain.
Let's talk about characters or people walking the land, walking country. Robbie, What Dusk seems to share with Tasma's work is that love of country, of landscape, and such an intimate knowledge, and so carefully etched in your story. In many ways, I felt the country was a character.
Oh, thanks, Greg. Yeah, had a crack at that. I guess in opposition to Tasma's, it's about outsiders, people have been brought there against their will in a time period and place, not very far from Port Phillip Bay, from where the Bunurong people are. But unlike Nannertgarrook and her people, they don't have any connection to the land. And yet, as Floyd and Iris, the twin protagonists of Dusk, travel up into the highlands, Iris in particular starts to feel this sense of connection and yearning and longing for this place, which she never expected. But she has no real family or historical or deep bloodline connection to it. And yet it persists in her anyway. So we start to see the kind of land and the skies and the mountains unfurl almost inside her as much as they do before her.
And that name, Renshaw, it's a curse, and I think you're right. A trap stretched open for a lifetime, a barbed gift delivered at birth. There's something biblical in a name being attached to a curse. So what's the nature of that curse?
Iris and Floyd are the children of escaped convicts who became what we call now bushrangers. I mean, part of what I wanted to do was write a bushranger story without ever using the word bushranger. Such a boring word in 2025. And I think a lot of people might have thought I'm going to write this colonial bushranger story. And it occurred to me that it would be much more interesting to write about the people who came next, the children of these people. How they adapt to a world in which they are not welcome and yet they also do not belong. And what might their life look like? And that's where it came from. So rather than writing so much about their parents, these notorious bushrangers, I wrote about the children and how they would fit in a world that neither wants nor accepts them. The curse of the name is really that people know that they're bushrangers' children. So they know who they are. And as children, participated in their parents' crimes. So they can never shake the stigma of their name, yet neither do they really try to deny it. It is who they are.
Iris and Floyd are more like demigods wandering sacred ground, as if they can see and feel things that others can't, in both the landscape and in the people they encounter. It's as if Iris and Floyd are embarking on some kind of odyssey.
Yeah, they're pretty shithouse demigods, though. I don't think they would have done too well in the Iliad or the Odyssey. Not much goes well for them. They're trying to hunt a puma and they don't even have a gun. But I think what I want to get across about them is Floyd has this horrible, debilitating back injury, and Iris in many ways functions as his carer. And Floyd is incredibly good at tracking the land, and he has all these qualities that you might think really lend themselves to a successful life in harsh conditions. But really what gets them through is Iris and her kindness and her doggedness and her commitment to caring for her brother, even though they drive each other crazy. I wanted their relationship to play out in the book, so we see that all these kind of traditional pursuits of strength, very masculine pursuits, actually don't help that much in the long run. What really helps is connection and humanity.
Tasma, I am Nannertgarrook is as much a statement of pride and meaningful identity as much as it is a title. The story's told in the first person, and I'm guessing that this was the natural choice for you.
Absolutely. I mean, I obviously have a skill set as an actor that lends itself towards, inner monologue, that kind of thing. But also the choice was about centering a worldview that was pretty much erased in the colonial records. So, we have glimpses of what these women and children went through with first-hand witness accounts from some of the women, predominantly the Tasmanian women. But otherwise, their names are gone for the most part. The focus is always on the sealers or the other colonial people in the framework. And so this was about, it's time to reclaim that voice, bring these women some, I guess, there's no way to recompense or reconcile what happened to them, but at least have their voices heard and their experiences understood in some way. And to me, the best way of doing that is to take the reader by the hand and go, I would like you to come with me, walk in these specific shoes so that you can see the world from this specific worldview. and hopefully come to some understanding and empathy about what it was that was happening at that time, to these young women and children.
There's also a very powerful sense of the Bunurong culture and for the preservation of that culture and family too. In the Babagan Betial totem, the mother whale, there's a custodial responsibility and shared identity that this totem carries for Nannertgarrook herself, but in a sense for all of us. Is this something you were committed to early in the writing process?
Definitely. The Barbane Betial mother whale stories have come down through my family line. So that's actually a golden thread that is still in existence from lore back at that time. So really, really important. But also, she's the creation being that helps spirit travel from their time on country to sky country, basically. So she's incredibly important in many aspects of life and teaches so much about life, particularly for women and motherhood and things like that. So it was really important. And then, to juxtapose that with what actually happens. And what happened was sealers and whalers came. And by the end of the whaling industry, we'd almost completely exterminated the southern right whale. The humpback whale population was down 95%. And a statistic that I put in the beginning of the book to sort of help frame this for the reader is that, for the blue whale, the largest animal on the planet, the numbers were around 220,000 pre-whaling, 2,000 today. It takes a very long time for blue whales to have their babies. And so, the recovery of these incredible species or animals have been so difficult post what was absolute unfettered slaughter. And I guess that was also, trying to juxtapose these two very, very different ways of looking at the world. An Indigenous perspective, which is all about sustainability, symbiotic harmony, custodianship of country, as opposed to what was the colonial perspective of what can I get out of it and how much can I get while it's still there, even if that means completely decimating the thing that is giving me my wealth. So it was, trying to show those two really different worldviews and how does a person who comes from one manage to survive as Aboriginal Australians, Torres Strait Islander Australians have done today, whilst reconciling those two opposite worlds and value systems.
I just think it's incredible in Tasma's novel, but also incredible in how it's played out today and the ongoing destruction of the climate around us. The dominant Western ways of thinking is destroying the planet we need to survive, let alone all these wonderful species. And yet there's still a lot of questions about, should we really do that much about it? And being from Tasmania, I read a lot of the old colonial records and journals where within like a few years of encountering the thylacine, there were people writing, it's probably going to die out because we're just going to have to kill it. And it was remorseless and almost kind of just accepted. It's quite shocking to confront now. The idea that it was never shocking is also quite strange. It's always been shocking, and it is still shocking. I feel more unmoored from the world the more I learn about it.
Something I wanted to ask you both about is the research that's gone into these two books. For you, Robbie, where did your research begin and where did it take you?
Look, a lot of it was spending time up in the highlands. I'm trying to get a really strong sense and feel of the place. I used to go camping there as a child quite a lot and really re-immersing myself in the wilderness up there. And apart from that, this is going to be absolute anathema to everyone in the Historical Novel Society of Australasia, and they will be very offended at me. I try and deliberately do the bare minimum of research that I need to, purely because I'm terrified of weighing my novels down with historical baggage. It doesn't suit the way everybody writes, but just for the way I write. I want there to be just enough so that the novel feels seamless and you can fall into it and that I've got all the details correct. And I don't really want anything more than that. Mostly because I don't want to get letters from people, but also because I want it to feel smooth and kind of almost hallucinatory. And just because of my particular writing style, if I learn about something, I really want to put it in the book. So if I know exactly how the axles on the carriages were made, I'm going to put it in there. And you don't need to know that as the reader. If I find out exactly, how they made the mortar to get the sandstone blocks that they carved off the cliffs together, I'm probably going to put that in there. And it's really hard for me to edit myself into not doing it. So I try to not learn. This is not anything I would recommend any other aspiring writer or just person do, but it's the only way I can temper myself. So my research process is actually to be really strict in limiting how much I learn.
Tasma, I'm guessing that you probably come from the other side of that equation. Your book is so detailed. I can imagine a lot of research has gone into this book.
Yes and no, because a lot of the writings of the time are coming from, as I've said before, a perspective that is not what I was wanting to explore in the book. So what is always so frustrating, I think, when you go back through the records trying to find a specific little gem of something, is that what I'm looking for is Aboriginal women's voices and details about what happened. And please can I just find their names somewhere, their real names somewhere? Like, the deeply frustrating and sad thing is that it's really difficult to find because the men taking these stories were not concerned with those aspects of the narrative. And so, I found a lot of what I was researching not particularly helpful in terms of writing the story. What I found most of all was another thing that I wanted to explore in the book was throughout all of the records, Aboriginal Australians are called savages and uncivilized. And yet what I understood about what the actions were that were being taken against these young women and children, to me, were the very epitome of savagery and uncivilized behavior. And so I was really wanting to flip that on its head, and part of that first part of the story is about showing, Nannertgarrook and her kin are living a very thriving, fruitful, civilized life on beautiful country, and they have done so for millennia. And what happens when invasion happens is savagery, is brutality, is to me the actions of an uncivilized mindset. So I guess going back to the research side of things, it really was looking at what was documented and deciding that what I wanted to tell was the worldview and the story that wasn't documented as much.
Tasma Walton and Robbie Arnott, thank you so much for joining me on the Good Reading Podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much.
I've been talking to Tasma Walton and Robbie Arnott about their ARA Historical Novel Society of Australia's award-winning books in the adult category for 2025. I Am Nannertgarrook is published by Bundi Fiction and Dusk is published by Pan Macmillan. You can find them both at goodreadingmagazine.com.au. My name's Greg Dobbs and thanks for listening. Subscribe to Good Reading print and online magazine at goodreadingmagazine.com.au.